Brawn breaker, drop!
There are moments in professional wrestling that feel inevitable, like watching storm clouds gather on the horizon, knowing that lightning will eventually strike, but never quite sure when or where. The tension between CM Punk and Bronson Reed had been building for weeks, each encounter more heated than the last, each confrontation pushing closer to a point of no return. The WWE Universe could feel it coming, that breaking point where words would no longer suffice, where professional restraint would shatter completely, and all that would remain would be raw, unbridled violence. That moment finally arrived on a Monday night in 2026, and what transpired would be etched into the collective memory of every fan who witnessed it. The arena was packed to capacity, the energy palpable even before the show began. Monday Night Raw had been on fire in recent weeks, with storylines intersecting and colliding in ways that felt organic and compelling. But nothing had captured the audience's attention quite like the escalating war of words and increasingly physical encounters between CM Punk and Bronson Reed. These were two men from different eras, different styles, different philosophies about what wrestling should be, and those differences had created friction that was about to ignite into an inferno. Bronson Reed had been on an absolute tear since returning to WWE's main roster. The Australian powerhouse had been systematically destroying everyone put in front of him, using his devastating combination of size, athleticism, and sheer brutality to leave a trail of broken bodies in his wake. His tsunami splash from the top rope had become one of the most feared offensive weapons in all of WWE, a move so devastating that announcers questioned whether anyone could survive it. Reed had developed an aura of invincibility, carrying himself with the confidence of a man who believed himself to be unstoppable. But CM Punk was not intimidated. The Second City Saint had faced giants before, had overcome impossible odds throughout his storied career, and he certainly wasn't about to be cowed by some powerhouse who thought brute strength was the only thing that mattered in professional wrestling. Punk had made his name on being the best in the world, on outthinking and out-wrestling opponents who had every physical advantage. His return to WWE had been nothing short of triumphant, reminding everyone why he had been one of the most compelling figures in wrestling history during his previous run. The feud had started simply enough, with Reed targeting Punk seemingly out of nowhere. During a routine Punk promo where he was addressing the WWE Universe about his goals and aspirations, Reed had interrupted, walking down to the ring with purpose and malice in his eyes. The confrontation had been tense, with Reed towering over Punk, using his size to try to intimidate the veteran. But Punk had stood his ground, microphone in hand, verbally eviscerating Reed with the kind of cutting promo work that had made him a legend. Reed's response had been physical rather than verbal. He had shoved Punk, sending him stumbling backward, then followed up with a devastating clothesline that had turned Punk inside out. The attack had been sudden and vicious, with Reed standing over Punk's prone body and simply smiling before walking away. That image of Reed smiling down at the fallen CM Punk had been replayed endlessly on social media and WWE programming, becoming a symbol of the disrespect that was fueling this conflict. But Punk had responded the following week, catching Reed by surprise during an interview segment backstage. The attack had been quick and precise, with Punk using a steel chair to level the playing field against the much larger opponent. Reed had been sent crashing through a catering table, food and debris flying everywhere, as Punk stood over him with the chair raised high, screaming that Reed had no idea what he had started. Security had rushed in to separate them, but the message had been sent. CM Punk was not going to be anyone's victim. The weeks that followed had seen the animosity escalate to dangerous levels. Reed had cost Punk a crucial match by interfering from ringside, pulling him out of the ring at a critical moment and delivering a thunderous powerbomb onto the announce table. The table had exploded on impact, and Punk had been counted out, suffering his first loss since returning to WWE. The look on Reed's face as he walked away from the carnage had been one of pure satisfaction, clearly enjoying the pain he was inflicting. Punk had retaliated by attacking Reed during his entrance the next week, not even waiting for Reed to get to the ring before launching into a furious assault. Using a kendo stick retrieved from under the ring, Punk had beaten Reed mercilessly, whilst rising on the big man's back and arms as the shots landed with sickening thuds. WWE officials had eventually pulled Punk away, but not before he had made his point. This feud was personal now, beyond professional rivalry, beyond wins and losses, into territory where hatred and the need for retribution ruled everything. The promos between the two men had become increasingly personal and vicious. Reed had mocked Punk's age, suggesting that he was a relic from a bygone era trying desperately to stay relevant in a new generation's WWE. He questioned whether Punk's body could still handle the rigors of modern wrestling, whether his time away had softened him, whether he still had what it took to compete at the highest level. The words were designed to cut deep, to attack not just Punk's abilities, but his identity as a performer. Punk's verbal responses had been equally brutal. He tore into Reed's character, questioning whether being big and hitting hard was really enough to be considered great in this business. He pointed out that WWE history was littered with monsters and powerhouses who had flamed out quickly, forgotten as soon as the next big thing came along. Punk suggested that Reed had no substance beyond his size, no real skill or psychology, no understanding of what it truly meant to be a professional wrestler. These weren't just scripted insults, they felt real, personal, like genuine contempt bleeding through the performance. The WWE Universe had been eating it up, with the feud quickly becoming one of the hottest talking points in wrestling. Social media was flooded with debates about who would win when these two finally met in a sanctioned match. Some argued that Reed's size and power advantage would be too much for even someone of Punk's skill to overcome. Others believed that Punk's experience and ring intelligence would allow him to find a way to defeat the Australian powerhouse. The anticipation was building to a fever pitch, but WWE management had been hesitant to book the match. There were legitimate concerns about the level of animosity between the two men, questions about whether they could be trusted to work together safely given the obvious personal issues that had developed. There were whispers backstage that the two had to be kept separated at all times, that the heat between them was genuine and potentially dangerous. Whether this was reality or masterful storytelling designed to build intrigue was unclear, but it added an extra layer of uncertainty to the whole situation. Then came the night everything exploded. Raw was taking place in Chicago, CM Punk's hometown, a city that had always embraced him as one of their own. The crowd was electric from the opening bell, chanting Punk's name during completely unrelated segments, clearly waiting for their hero to appear. The atmosphere was charged with an energy that only comes from a wrestling event in a city with deep emotional investment in one of the performers. Bronson Reed had been scheduled to compete in a match that night, defending his position as one of Raw's most dominant forces against a mid-card competitor. The match itself had been relatively routine, with Reed showcasing his power and brutality, systematically dismantling his opponent with the kind of ruthless efficiency that had become his trademark. The crowd had been vocally hostile toward Reed, showering him with boos and chants supporting CM Punk, clearly trying to get under his skin. Reed had won the match decisively, as expected, finishing his opponent with the devastating tsunami splash that had become his signature. The impact had been brutal, the opponent's body flattening beneath Reed's massive frame as he crashed down from the top rope. Reed had pinned him casually, almost dismissively, before standing and demanding a microphone. The crowd's boos intensified as Reed prepared to speak, knowing that nothing good was about to come out of his mouth. What followed was a promo designed specifically to provoke CM Punk and the Chicago audience. Reed stood in the center of the ring, microphone in hand, and began verbally attacking everything the city held dear. He mocked Chicago's sports teams, insulted the city itself, and then turned his attention to their beloved native son, CM Punk. The words were inflammatory and personal, designed to cut as deeply as possible. Reed questioned Punk's legacy, suggesting that he had been overrated during his original run and was even more irrelevant now. He called Punk a coward for not facing him in a sanctioned match, accused him of being afraid, suggested that Punk knew he couldn't beat the Bronson Breaker and was hiding behind WWE management's reluctance to book the match. The crowd's reaction was thunderous, a wall of boos and hostile chants directed at Reed. He seemed to feed off the negativity, smiling and continuing his verbal assault. He claimed that Chicago had backed the wrong horse, that Punk was past his prime and no longer the best in the world, that the voice of the voiceless had nothing left to say that anyone wanted to hear. Reed then made the ultimate provocation, directly challenging Punk to come to the ring right now if he had any courage at all, daring him to face the Bronson Breaker without the protection of referees and rules. For a moment, nothing happened. The crowd was chanting for CM Punk, begging for him to appear, but the entrance ramp remained empty. Reed laughed, using the silence as proof of his claims, suggesting that Punk was indeed a coward, hiding in the back while a real man stood in the ring and called him out in his own hometown. The mockery was relentless, each word designed to provoke maximum response. Then the familiar static of CM Punk's entrance music hit, and the arena absolutely erupted. The sound was deafening, a roar of anticipation and excitement that shook the building to its foundation. Every fan was on their feet, cameras raised, knowing they were about to witness something special. The entrance ramp was bathed in light, and there stood CM Punk, dressed not in ring gear but in street clothes, suggesting this wasn't a planned appearance, but rather a spontaneous response to Reed's provocation. But Punk didn't do his usual entrance routine. He didn't pose at the top of the ramp, didn't acknowledge the crowd's adulation, didn't play to the cameras. His face was a mask of pure, focused rage, his eyes locked on Bronson Reed standing in the ring. This wasn't the confident, cocky CM Punk who cut witty promos and smirked at his opponents. This was something darker, more dangerous, something primal that had been unleashed by weeks of attacks and disrespect culminating in being called out in his own hometown. Punk walked down the ramp with purpose, each step measured and deliberate. Reed stood in the center of the ring, microphone still in hand, that same mocking smile on his face, confident in his size advantage and believing he had gotten exactly what he wanted. The crowd was at a fever pitch, the noise almost drowning out commentary, everyone sensing that something explosive was about to occur. As Punk reached ringside, he didn't climb the steps or enter through the ropes. Instead, he reached under the ring, searching for something, his eyes never leaving Reed. The big man in the ring tensed slightly, his smile faltering, perhaps beginning to realize that the level of anger he was seeing from Punk was beyond anything he had anticipated. Punk's hand emerged from under the ring holding a steel chair, and the crowd somehow got even louder, sensing violence was imminent. Punk slid into the ring with the chair in hand, and Reed finally dropped the microphone, preparing for the confrontation. For a brief moment, the two men stood facing each other, Punk with the chair, Reed with his fists clenched, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. The referee was frantically calling for both men to stand down, knowing this wasn't a sanctioned match and that he had no real authority to stop what was about to happen. Then Punk exploded into action with a fury that shocked everyone. He swung the chair with all his strength, the steel connecting with Reed's skull with a sickening crack that echoed through the arena. Reed stumbled backward, clearly stunned by the impact, his hands going to his head. But Punk didn't stop. He swung again, this time catching Reed in the shoulder and driving him into the corner. The assault was relentless, with Punk hammering blow after blow with the chair, each impact accompanied by a roar from the Chicago crowd. Reed tried to cover up, his arms raised to protect his head, but Punk was beyond rational thought now. He was operating on pure emotion, weeks of frustration and anger channeled into each devastating chair shot. The sound of steel on flesh filled the arena, a brutal symphony that spoke to the genuine hatred that had developed between these two men. Reed's body was being battered, welts and red marks appearing wherever the chair connected. The referee was trying desperately to stop the assault, grabbing at Punk's arm, trying to pull him away, but Punk shrugged him off effortlessly, never breaking his focus on the task of punishing Bronson Reed. Security personnel began rushing down the entrance ramp, but they seemed hesitant to actually enter the ring and physically restrain CM Punk, perhaps out of respect for his status, perhaps out of fear of his current mental state. Punk finally tossed the chair aside, but only because he had moved on to a different form of punishment. He began delivering a series of kicks to Reed's head and body, precision strikes that targeted specific areas for maximum impact. These weren't wild, emotional attacks, but rather the calculated offense of a skilled striker who knew exactly where and how to hit to cause the most damage. Reed was slumping in the corner now, his defenses failing, his massive frame unable to withstand the concentrated assault. Then Punk grabbed Reed and pulled him out of the corner, positioning him for a move. The crowd recognized what was coming and exploded in anticipation. Punk lifted Reed onto his shoulders in position for the GTS, the go-to-sleep, his devastating finishing maneuver. The fact that Punk was able to lift the much larger Reed was a testament to the adrenaline and rage fueling him. For a moment, Punk held Reed in that position, the crowd counting down, building anticipation. Then Punk drove his knee up as he pulled Reed's head down, the GTS connecting with brutal force. Reed's body went limp immediately, the impact clearly devastating. He collapsed to the canvas, motionless, and the crowd was in absolute pandemonium. Punk stood over Reed's fallen form, chest heaving, sweat dripping from his face, his expression still one of pure fury. The GTS would have been enough for most competitors to consider their revenge satisfied, but Punk wasn't finished. He exited the ring and reached under it again, this time pulling out a table. The crowd's reaction somehow intensified even further, knowing that Punk was planning to escalate the violence even more. He slid the table into the ring, and then followed it back in, setting it up methodically in the center of the canvas, while Reed remained motionless nearby. Security was at ringside now, but they seemed frozen, uncertain about how to handle this situation involving one of WWE's biggest stars in the middle of a berserker rage. Punk set the table up carefully, making sure it was stable and positioned exactly where he wanted it. Then he turned his attention back to Reed, grabbing the big man and using every ounce of strength to pull him to his feet. Reed was dead weight, clearly out of it from the GTS, offering no resistance as Punk manhandled him into position near the table. The crowd was buzzing with anticipation, wondering what Punk had planned. Punk climbed to the second turnbuckle, pulling Reed up with him in an incredible display of determination and strength. The visual was striking, the normally smaller Punk holding the massive Bronson Reed in position on the turnbuckles. Punk was setting up for something huge, something that would send an unmistakable message about the consequences of disrespecting CM Punk in his hometown. With a roar of effort and emotion, Punk executed a superplex from the second rope, sending both himself and Reed crashing through the table with earth-shattering impact. The wood exploded on contact, pieces flying in every direction, both men lying in the wreckage motionless for a long moment. The crowd was on their feet, a mixture of shock and awe at the destruction they had just witnessed. The sound of the impact had been sickening, the visual of both men lying among the shattered remains of the table dramatic and powerful. But somehow, Punk began to stir first. He rolled out of the wreckage, clearly hurt from the move but driven by something beyond physical pain. He looked down at Reed, who remained motionless among the broken table pieces, and apparently decided that even this wasn't enough. Punk's face showed no satisfaction, only continued rage, suggesting that nothing short of completely destroying Bronson Reed would satisfy the anger burning inside him. Punk exited the ring again, and this time he retrieved another table, then another, sliding them both into the ring. The crowd was in disbelief, wondering how much further Punk was willing to take this assault. He set both tables up side by side, creating a larger surface area for whatever he had planned next. The methodical nature of his preparations was somehow more disturbing than frenzied violence would have been, suggesting calculated intent rather than momentary loss of control. Reed was beginning to show signs of consciousness again, stirring among the wreckage of the first table. Punk saw this and immediately went on the attack again, delivering vicious stomps to keep the big man down. He pulled Reed up once more, dragging him toward the corner where the two new tables sat waiting. The referee had given up trying to stop the assault, simply standing aside and letting it happen, perhaps recognizing that nothing short of a small army would be able to stop CM Punk at this point. Punk climbed to the top rope this time, the highest point in the ring, pulling Reed up with him in another stunning display of determination. The crowd was buzzing with nervous energy, many fans covering their eyes, unable to watch what was clearly going to be a devastating conclusion to this brutal assault. Punk balanced on the top rope with Reed positioned for what looked like it might be another superplex, but this time from an even more dangerous height onto 2 tables instead of 1. The execution was perfect and terrifying. Punk launched himself and Reed off the top rope, both men sailing through the air before crashing through both tables with an impact that seemed to shake the entire ring. The explosion of wood was massive, pieces flying into the crowd, both men disappearing into a pile of wreckage.